Welcome to Dividend Talk, episode 154, where investments fit within your personal finance with special guest Tiago Dias.
Whether you're a seasoned pro or just getting started, Dividend Talk is the place to be for insights, analysis, and unsalted advice on how to make the most of your money through dividends with our own unique European flavour. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and join our community on Facebook at Dividend Talk. See you on the inside.
Hey, Tiago, welcome back to the show. It's been a while. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing well. It's been a little over a year, right, since I last came?
Yeah, definitely. And it was quite a popular show. We got lots of positive feedback about it, specifically your wisdom that you were sharing with us. But maybe for people that are first-time listeners or relatively new listeners, could you introduce yourself a little bit to the audience?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Tiago. I'm a Portuguese investor. I've been researching investing on my own for quite a few years now. I really started back when I was still in university, failed, waited for a few years, then slowly started back up. And yeah, I've been writing an investment blog for about 2 years now, and I've been building up my portfolio for my financial independence, and hopefully I will hit the retire early part at some point.
Yeah, that's really great to hear, Tiago. And we'll make sure also that we put the link to your Substack where you have regular articles published also in the description of this podcast so that people can read more about you and what you're writing. But hey, let's just start with the news of the week because today there was some amazing news published. Did you hear about it?
Yes.
Yes.
Although I understand that you're very excited here, but I'm a bit less so. I'm just warning you now.
No, that's good. That's good. We like different opinions here. Definitely welcome here at Dividend Talk. So, maybe for the audience, the EU, the European Union, is proposing to change finally the withholding tax procedures. And their goal is with that to promote fairer taxation and fight the tax fraud and support cross-border investment across the bloc. And I mean, we all know about this, right? Buying dividend stocks in countries like Switzerland or Sweden are a tough pill to swallow because they come with 30% or 35% dividend withholding tax. Yes, we can reclaim the tax funds. It takes a long time typically. Sometimes it can even take more than a year. That's my experience with Germany. They require tax residence forms, la-di-da-di-da-di-da. And actually, the interesting thing is that the European Union is recognizing that. And when I saw the article and the data that they were quoting, it came directly from the consultation that they did like over a year ago, where I also participated in, some of you as well. But what was really interesting here is if you read the article, they say like investors have to deal, and here it comes, with more than 450 different forms across the EU. So almost 500,000 forms, which most of them are only available in their national languages. I mean, if you're, for instance, an American investor listening to this podcast, this is Europe. Be happy that you live in the States with your with your dividend tax policy because it makes all the difference. But also why they want to do this proposal, because I never think that they really have the heart at the citizen. Yeah, in the end, I think it's just a business case for them because they have also an expected tax loss from scandals and refund scandals around refund procedures around 150 billion over the last 20 years. So that's a 7.5 billion tax loss that they can't reclaim due to tax fraud, which is a lot on an annual basis.
Yeah, but that was, if I recall correctly, that was due to VAT refund scams, not
No, this is
really
also with the dividend
dividends.
withholding
Was it?
tax. Yes,
Oh.
definitely, because you can, you can claim things back again
Yeah.
without maybe even owning the dividend certificates as an example. So I read an article about it not too long ago in Germany.
Oh, right.
And
I
that's
saw
why
that as well.
And that's why I think the German tax authority also didn't accept my DEGIRO printouts in their first try. But look, what it is all about, what they are proposing to change. So investors with a diversified portfolio, as they write it, in the EU will need only one digital tax residence certificate to reclaim several funds during the same calendar year, and they need to issue it within 1 day. This is really nice because for me now, I need to fill in a form. A week later, I have it, and then I can only send it to one country. Now, the second one is 2 fast-track procedures, and the countries can choose there, from what I understand. It's either a relief at source, so that automatically already you get the 15%. You don't need to worry about anything else, or a quick refund system, whatever that means. But I believe that it's probably all digitized. That's my assumption here. Otherwise, it can't be quick. Last but not least, and this may be a little bit tricky for people that don't trust governments and really, how is it, admire their own privacy, there will be a standardized reporting obligation for certified financial intermediaries to effectively report to the relevant tax administration about the dividends that have been paid to us. So I have no issue with that, of course, because I'm a loyal tax citizen. I don't mind paying the taxes if they apply to me. Last thing I do is tax avoidance or tax fraud. I would also not recommend it to anyone here, of course. So for me, it would only be great. And yeah, if the proposal gets accepted, it should come into force on the 1st of January 2027. So that would be still like, what is it? 3.5 calendar years. I can probably still wait for it. It's quicker than I expected. So for me, this is awesome news, and I really hope that this gets implemented sooner than later, because it will make my life so much easier. And I think for most of our listeners as well.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has some benefits, right? But it's a little bit like, the little honey that you put where you put a little bit of bait in front of a trap, so that when someone goes in.
Come on, just say, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of?
Well, I mean, let's face it here, right? There's several issues. First of all, the standardized reporting obligation, that's actually something that already exists. What this will do is effectively it'll provide even additional information, and it will effectively automate the enforcement of certain tax authorities and tax actions.
Yeah.
Which can be good and bad, right? If it's the correct tax action to enforce, then okay, great. Whereas if it's the incorrect tax to enforce, perhaps because the tax authority has the wrong information or is mistaken, as has happened before and as regularly happens, then all that this will do is give the IRS, the bureaucracy, additional points of failure and additional points where they can effectively screw with you. So I'm not sure if you're familiar, but for example, this year in Portugal, there was a significant amount of people who received dividends and reported those dividends on their taxes, including the dividend tax that was withheld outside. And because of some sort of issue with the tax authority, even though it was the exact same forms that had been filled for years, those were not credited and they were charged an additional tax on top of it.
Yeah.
And what I see happening here with this type of thing is, okay, there's going to be some error somewhere that's going to cause a lot of trouble for people, and it's going to be a whole lot more difficult to resolve, because now the tax authority can say, oh, it's not us, it's coming from the EU.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, this risk is definitely there. And I mean, yeah, let's trust the process, please. Let me stay optimistic for a while.
Okay.
Let reality kick
Then-
in a year
Then
from
you're
now.
not going to like my second issue that I have with
Go on,
this.
go on. I'll take it all on the chin. Come on, let it go.
So, if you recall, during the financial crisis,
Yeah.
there were certain European governments who needed some money, let's say it,
Mm.
and they did some things that at least I would consider quite unethical. Like, for example, in Cyprus, they froze the bank accounts and then levied
Mm.
part of the bank account balances. In Hungary, they seized the people's private pension funds.
Mm-hmm.
And this sort of thing will simply provide additional tools and additional ways for those governments to come in and take what isn't theirs whenever they
Yeah,
feel like.
I think this is generally a risk with governments that are in a need for money. I saw today on social media something passing by about ABP, the biggest pension fund in the Netherlands, where if you looked at the cost structure, people in the Netherlands are probably paying more than €1,000 per year on their pension, about how is it, maintenance fee and such, and all for the pension funds. So this is just how you say it, this is just theft, yeah, legalized theft. And this than a pension fund, but with governments the same. You're right, digitalization makes it easier to track, and it comes down to whether you trust your government or not with your money. Of course I don't, but I still trust it well enough to let the benefit of full digitalization and instant money to my account with dividends to outweigh that. So I'm a bit more on the positive side. But hey,
We'll have to disagree on this.
yeah, I'll quickly jump over that one. But no,
I do hope that you're right and it ends up being nothing but a benefit. I mean, for you, it will certainly be. For me, it won't affect all that much because I don't have a lot of European companies. But at least for investors like you, it'll definitely be a good help.
Good. So hey, the main topic, right? I reached out to you if you would like to join us during our vacation break here, because this one's pre-recorded again for one of the shows. And I asked you like, hey, is there something you want to talk about? And you said like, guys, we talk too little about where investments really fit within your personal finance. So can you explain a little bit about why this came to your mind, and then we'll take it from there to talk a little bit what this really means to us.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, this is really something that should come to the mind of everyone who's thinking about the future and thinking about where their life is going to be in a few years. And part of it is determining, okay, where do I want my life to be and what do I want it to be, right? What are my goals? And you need to really just sit down and take an hour or so and figure out, okay, in 20, 30 years, what do I want things to look like? And from there, you can decide what your next steps should be, right? Because if you just start walking somewhere randomly, eventually you're going to wind up in the ditch. But if you have a destination in mind and you walk towards that destination, then you'll probably get there if you try. And so, at least for me, a big part of my investing is figuring out, okay, what do I want to do and how can I get there?
And that comes... what do you want to do? What is your investment goal? Why are you investing?
Right. So I think the easiest way to describe it would be actually fairly mundane. I would like to, be able to not have to work if I don't want to. I'd be able to have free time that I could spend on my hobbies, raise a family, have a nice quiet place, on my own home, that sort of thing. I think that pretty much everyone can relate to those sorts of goals. And I think that even people who aren't necessarily thinking about those goals can generally see, okay, yeah, that's interesting, and I would like to have that at some point.
And what's the time horizon that you're thinking about?
So yeah, so that kind of depends, right? How am I going to get there, right? And that comes into what are you willing to do in order to get there, and what's the next steps for you, and that's going to change depending on where you are in life and what you have. So yeah.
So I guess the goals are therefore really, really important, right? And for me, for instance, a goal is I want to be financially independent. I don't know yet about retire early because honestly, I like my job that I'm having. I could quit it. I could stay. I haven't made up my mind yet. But what for me, financially independent is really a feeling of ultimate freedom. At least that's how I imagine it myself. But I can't imagine myself doing nothing. I don't have that personality type. When I'm sitting at home for 5 minutes, I already need to do something. Yeah. So, and I also feel always that I need to do something with purpose and something useful. That's also why I started a blog. I want to share my knowledge. I want to inspire others actually to also take matters a bit in their own hands, right? And that's for me a clear goal. I want to do it in 15 years, let's say. And I'm now 9 years down the 9 years down the road, let's say. So according to plan, I still have 5 to 6 years left. But of course, then to get there, I think here's where you also want to talk about. There are a few things just really important, specifically when we get started, right? And can you elaborate a little bit on that one?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing that you really need to understand is you can't figure out what to do unless you know where you are. So the first thing you need to do is go to your bank account, take out all your statements, classify them, and figure out for the last year, where have you spent your money? How much came in? How much went out? What did you spend it on? And then you can use that to figure out where you went right and where you went wrong, and the things that might need to change and the things that are okay to stay the same. And so you can use that information to come up with an actual realistic budget that you can track on a month-to-month basis and figure out, okay, this month I'm going to spend X amount on rent, X amount on groceries. I'm going to spend X amount on going out to eat for restaurants or some other entertainment. And I will set aside X amount for my future, for investing, for my emergency fund, for whatever it may be. And once you have that, which isn't that difficult to do, you can really see, okay, here's what my next steps need to be, because it becomes obvious once you have all that information and it's all presented cleanly.
Yeah, but I would also add to it what I did myself is I used what you call the Moscow rule. Like, let's say, what are the must-haves, the should-have, the could-haves, and the won't-have. So I classified also all my spendings like this. And I must confess that in the beginning, when I started doing it and tracking my spendings, I had a lot of stuff that wasn't in the must-have or in the should-have category, and that was also an eye-opener. So then I really started to challenge myself: do I really need this? Does it make me happy? That was also one of the fundamental questions there, and that's how I was able to drastically increase my savings rate. And I was definitely also I just money was just floating out until I really realize that although I always had a little bit of a frugal lifestyle. So you can consider yourself frugal, but doesn't mean
You actually are.
you're actually doing it. Yeah, living towards it. But what I also think is important with that is that savings rate, of course, really defines how quick things can go. And here's always a difficulty, because we have listeners from different ages. We have listeners in their early 20s. The bulk of the listeners are around the 40, but we have also some listeners in their 60s, yeah, that are just maybe 5-6 years before retirement and just want to, build up a little bit additionally so that they can go with less stress into retirement, right? And savings rates are different there, but also the goals are therefore different. So how do you look at savings rates, for instance, or what would you recommend to people that are, let's say, in their 20s? You know, they just finished university, started working, maybe 2-3 years in the job. How would you recommend them to take the approach towards financial independence?
Right. So that really depends on three main factors, right? The first one is when do you want to retire? At what age? Right. And if we assume that you want to retire at the standard retirement age in Europe, that's 67 years old, then you can go with what's my current age and you can determine how much money you're going to need, right? So generally speaking, if you're starting from zero, you have no loans, your net worth is zero, and you are in your early 20s, then if you put away, say, 15% for retirement, then you'll probably be okay, right? You probably won't be able to retire early, but I think by the time you reach 67, you'll have a nice nest egg that will be able to tidy you up for the rest of your life without too much issue. If, however, you hold on, right, the earlier you start, the easier it gets. The later you start, the harder it gets. By the time you get to 30, if you're starting from zero, the 15% isn't going to cut it. You're going to need to be saving up 25%. If you only start at 40, you better be ready to save up well over 40% of your take-home pay, because otherwise it's not going to happen. And so it's really important to start saving as early as you can, even if it's just a small amount, even if it feels like nothing, it really, really helps.
Yeah, what I can add to my own experience, right? When I started working straight out of university, I was able to maybe maximum earn, save maybe €1,000 a year. And some months I couldn't save. I was overspending, but then other months I had a little bit lighter. So on average, let's say 50 to €100 a month. And I was just stashing this on my savings account, and effectively I didn't know. I wasn't financially wise like that. So effectively I was kind of creating an emergency fund for when the fridge would break down or something like that. But people that are listening here, I think what is really important, if you're working in industry, so the industry you choose is really important, I think, because in some industries, when you start working, you might come in on a high salary, but then you're also kind of stuck, and you're, for instance, subject to union negotiations that are hardly beating inflations. Yeah. But if like in my case in IT, I stepped in relatively low, but because of the experience you gain in IT, your growth is also a bit faster than maybe in other industries. At least that's how I have experienced it. So with that, avoidance of lifestyle inflation is really key, because if you're able to, I'm not saying as a student or as a starter, but if you're able to and that's what I did, right? Every time when I got, let's say, a 6% salary increase, I used 3% of that directly to savings, and the other 3% I allowed myself a little bit, because in the early years you also still need to build your life. So you wanna buy furniture, so you do have some lifestyle inflation that you need. But saving half of your salary increase was for me something how I was able to achieve this. The second one that's actually really often underestimated here when people are early in the journey, your life partner. If you find a life partner that is also willing to avoid lifestyle inflation and is on board on the journey to financial independence, that is such a differentiator, because suddenly you can get two incomes, but still having the same housing expense or something like that if you live together. So for me, that was another big one. Living together, my wife suddenly, because we got married, my wife starting to earn as well salary. Almost this whole salary started to pay for many things. And that's when really, for me, the time came that we could start investing. I just wasn't even aware about investing, because at that time, investing was bad. Yeah, or no, not bad. Investing was risky. Better put it on a savings account. That was kind of the narrative that I grew up with. So all I'm trying to say is, like, in these early days, I think, like, getting into the habit of investing, even if it's just 50 or 100 euro, once you have an emergency fund that you feel comfortable with, I think this habit is so important. And then counting on doing your best at your work and having salary growth, plus hopefully, if you're lucky, finding a life partner that's also on the journey, I think that can really fuel yourself in the 20s, right? And get really far.
Absolutely, absolutely. And even if either you or your partner aren't necessarily comfortable with investing, because as you mentioned, investing is risky. Usually people are comfortable with at least one thing, and that is owning their own home.
Yeah.
So if you can do nothing else, just setting money aside for getting started on a down payment for a house really helps.
Yeah, definitely. And how do you look at the emergency fund, right? How do you look at that in general? How much are you saving yourself in your emergency fund?
Right. So, okay, I'm a bit conservative here.
Mhm.
I know that a lot of people say, "Oh, 3 months is okay. Oh, 4 months is okay." I tend to keep between 6 and 8 months
Mhm.
of expenditures in my emergency fund, and additionally, I split my emergency fund between bank accounts.
Yeah.
Because I've had circumstances where I lost the bank card from one
Yeah.
place, and I had to get it resent again. And then I thought to myself, what am I going to eat tomorrow? Right? Because for the most part, I use my bank account, so I don't have a lot of cash on hand. And so it was actually a genuine concern of, okay, I have nothing in my fridge. What am I going to eat tomorrow? Well, the bank card is on its way.
So, Tiago, as a student, we had a fix for that. We always had like 20 empty beer bottles on the balcony, because then you could take those beer bottles, hand them into the shop. You would have had few euros, and then you could buy a frozen pizza or a bottle of peanut butter with some white bread. So that's a student life hack, I would say.
Good point. Good point. Unfortunately, I don't have any empty bottles right now.
Yeah, but
But yeah.
The fun fact is that I have also a large emergency fund, but it's because we live in a too big house, and if something happens to the roof or something like that, I need a certain amount of money. Although you could argue, and that's what I'm wondering sometimes, I could also just take a loan at that time, because I'm just not doing anything with this money already for years. I've never needed my emergency fund. There's also some research out there that you like, it was from 4 or 5 years ago, and it's based on America, that if you look at what you technically need, is just $2,500, because that will pay for most of the bills if you exclude medical bills in America. So for me, an emergency fund, sometimes I'm wondering about it, like, do I really need so much? Because maybe I can just take a short-term loan, because my savings rate is also high. Yeah, but yeah, I've not pulled the trigger on that one yet. But for me, I've got also something around 8 or 9 months, and the money is just not working for me. I guess that's also why it's an emergency fund. Yeah, but doubts are, I think, human. Let's say like that.
No, I mean that's certainly a valid strategy, right? If you're really trying to min-max your financial life and your investments, your emergency fund, everything, then yeah, I can see why people might want to do that. But for me, I see debt as a risk, as something that I should avoid if I
Yeah.
can. And I don't think it's the small amount of income that I would be getting from those 6 to
Yeah.
8 months of expenses that would really just
Yeah, I actually got inspired about it when reading balance sheets. Yeah, if you think about T. Rowe Price balance sheet, there's no debt.
yeah.
Yeah, so, and they do this to be anti-cyclical. So if you're living a debt-free life, and I've got a small debt still on the mortgage, but I could easily ask some additional money on my mortgage, right? So that's kind of the thinking, like, how does a company does it? But yeah, I think it's anyway good to really have a about people's emergency funds. I think that's a must do. And yeah, then then you're suddenly on the journey, right? You're investing and such. What are the do's and don'ts really, once you know your goals and such when it comes to investing? How do you make sure you're successful?
So the first thing to do is to not get caught out, right? There should not be any unexpected expenses, for example.
Yeah.
Right. Here in Germany, where I live, there's a radio and TV tax
Yeah.
that comes by once every few months,
Mhm.
and so every 3 to 6 months you get a letter in the mail saying, hey, you owe us 100 euros or
Yeah.
200 euros or however much it is. And so you can count on that. Even if it's not coming in every month, you know that in a couple of months it's going to come in. So just set that money aside, right?
Yeah.
You know that your car that you're buying is going to have a lifespan of, I don't know, 7, 8, 10 years. So just set some money aside throughout those 10 years to buy the next car that you're going to get.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you have a house, a roof might go out, right? Every 20 years, you might need to replace a roof. So set some money aside for that.
Yeah.
If you want to go on vacations, every month, just put some cash aside. Make sure that you have these automatic transfers from your checking account onto your expected expenses bucket, wherever it may be. Maybe it's in a separate bank account. And yeah, just do that. And this brings me to the other thing, which is automate as much of your finances as you possibly can. I really can't stress this enough, right? You can do automatic transfers to your brokerage. You can put your rent on auto pay. You can have a lot of your financial life just dealt with automatically without you having to do anything. And that really helps you because it takes away the money from your checking account, so you won't see it, so you won't be tempted to spend it.
I think, I mean, my experience is exactly the same. And we call this also often pay yourself first. Yeah. With send your money to your brokerage account so that it pops up there and that you can start investing it. And some brokers allow you to also auto invest it straight away, like trading 212 into the ETF or whatever of your choice. I think this is so key because it avoids all the psychology or the temptation that you might have. And in the early beginning, I was first paying all the bills and living my life. And if something was left at the end of the month, I would invest it. But I turned it around. I transferred straight away 50% of my income to the broker. And with the rest, I need to live. And sometimes I just have a few days left in the end of the month instead of money left. And I'm not collecting beer bottles anymore then, but I am going to the basement to see if there's still a pot of peanut butter. And yeah, that's how it goes. But it really helps because that's how you really stick to your plan. And I think to stick to the plan is so important, right?
Yeah. So you just mentioned you have just a little bit left over at the end of the month. And that's really why it's important to have a budget, right? If you have that budget set up from the beginning of the month, like before you even get your paycheck for next month, you'll be able to say, okay, I'm going to need this amount of money. And so that means I can spend this on groceries, this on rent, etc. And so you won't get caught out. And if anything does happen, if you get a surprise bill or whatever, first of all, you already have the fund for unexpected expenses. And you can deal with that on your budget and on your
But
own terms.
my experience is that usually you can let an invoice wait for 2-3 days. Usually there's a payment term, let's say in 7 days, so it carries over into when your salary comes again. But also, a month doesn't go in a straight line. So when I have 2-3 days of month left, it's really not an issue, because this is really where the discipline kicks in, and it makes you make choices like, okay, let's go not this weekend out for a dinner, or for this trip, let's do it next week or something like that, right? I've got 2 kids. Sometimes they're a bit annoyed by that, but yeah, I'm also trying to teach them some financial discipline with this. So, and then when it comes to it, are there any like easy rules to apply also while you're on the journey? Because the journey is long, right? So when you're investing things, what should you think about?
So first of all, you need to think about what's your end goal and how much money are you actually going to need, right?
Yeah.
And generally speaking, I know that the 4% rule is quite popular in dividend investment circles and in investment circles in general, but unfortunately, it's actually quite risky. From what I recall, there were a few issues with the 4% study that ended up meaning that there was some survivorship bias imposed there, and so the actual safe withdrawal rate is quite a bit lower. So the actual safe withdrawal rate is around 2.25%, if I recall correctly. And so what that means is you need 45 times your yearly expenses before you can afford to retire, which can sound quite quite difficult to achieve, right? I mean, that's if you're spending everything that you make, that's 45 years that you need to have as a buffer. But if you're not spending as much as you make, if you have like a large savings rate, if you started a long while ago and you've let your money work for you and compound, it's really not that as difficult as it might otherwise seem, right?
Yeah, so for me, I'm not anticipating on the 4% rule. I'm really looking at the dividend income, but you're right. There are some catches with the 4% rule that you need to be aware of. In general, I would say, indeed. And on paper, everything looks nice, right? The real experience is where it comes to, and this also, I think, where I would recommend never to really go on a slim fire, from what I heard from others, unless you know that you will continue to work or hustle your way around to earn some additional money. But otherwise, like have a 20% buffer or something like that. If there's a dividend cut or whatever happens, that you're not straight away into an issue, and that you then don't need to withdraw from your capital, as an example.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to get to age 90 and your investment fund has just ran out and you're still going to live another 5 years.
Yeah. No, good. So if we talk about where investments fit within your personal finance, I think we're talking about investments here in general, right? An investment can be real estate, your own house, although it doesn't generate passive income, I would say, your house, but you could sell it after a while, right? If that's your intention, you could live smaller at the older age, let's say, and do it. So there are many ways to
your house does generate
invest.
some income, right? It replaces the rent that you would otherwise be paying. So
yeah. So when you pay it down, there's opportunity cost to that extent. Yeah, definitely. But what I'm more trying to say is, like, you can go for the real estate path when it comes to investing and building your nest egg. You can go for just capital growth by just generally the stock market. You can go for dividend income. And you can even invest in businesses outright, right? Locally, for instance, in the local ice cream shop, whatever. Yeah, but I think the rule stays a little bit the same. I think here it's like, spend less than you earn. Make sure you are able to grow your income over your career. Your career is not a straight line. Usually, it's there's kind of an, for most people, what I saw in the statistics is that the top is in the mid 40s somewhere, and then some people drop off. So it's not easy to maintain from there. And then have an emergency fund that you feel comfortable with, and then the rest, automate it, pay yourself first, and in those investment vehicles that you feel like most, I guess, circle of competence in these kinds of things, right? And build your nest egg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just make sure that your money is working for you, even if it's working in your house, giving
Yeah.
you housing, or whether it's across the ocean in some company that's making some widget for
Yeah.
some group of people somewhere.
Because the pension funds are not going to help us, guys. Again, now with the inflation rates that we had last year's, pension funds are hiking high. It looks like really, really great, but it is really not keeping up with inflation. And secondly, sometimes they are just using bookkeeping tricks, but with that they are lowering your safety profile on guaranteed pension and at retirement age. So watch out with that. Really read your pension letters that you get every year. Read them, and just put the indexing number that you get besides the inflation rate. Do it for the last 10 years, and you will see that you lost already 20 to 30% of future I said purchasing power. That's reality. So good. Thanks, Tiago, for bringing this topic to the podcast. You're right. We don't discuss enough about this. Sometimes it feels like it's so obvious for people that are longer in the journey, but it was a good topic. Having said that, shall we go to some listeners' questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, the first one comes from Facebook, from Tim Ainley, and he's asking, actually, how far are you already on your financial independence journey, and what advice would you give to your younger self when starting out?
Well, I'm honestly still starting out realistically, right? That it takes time. I would say that I'm about, so in terms of dividend income, I get about 1 month of my expenses. So if I want to fully replace my my income with my dividends, then I'm still 1/12 of the way there.
Yeah.
But let's be real here. It's going to speed up as things go on, and as the dividends will grow, as my investments will grow, it'll get much quicker. So
Nice.
yeah.
So I'm at 50% at the moment, and my advice that would I give to my younger self is be consistent from the start. I really missed out on some compounding effects during the first 3 years because I was not paying myself first. I was sometimes waiting. I felt like the stock market is overvalued. I'm sure many listeners feel the same now after the AI hype that they felt that it run up too far, and that they think like, you know what, just wait 1 or 2 months. Let's keep my cash on the side. I did that, and then when you look at the statistics, and I knew, for instance, that I needed to invest a certain amount of money per year, I wasn't doing it. I just had it waiting on my savings account because I thought there will come a crash or something like that. So I had to learn that by looking at the data after 3 years. So if I could transfer this knowledge to our listeners, or to at least one listener here, now also we have the most predicted recession in history coming up, and there it goes. Yeah. So and by the way,
isn't the next recession the most predicted recession?
Exactly. But also, what I want to call out, I'm a child kind of when I started my career of the great financial recession, where we saw a 50% drop. For me, I thought for most of the years that this is kind of what a recession is. Yeah, because you have this recency bias. But now we saw COVID, and we saw a little bit in 2014. The stock market crashes. 50% is not normal. This maybe happens once or twice in our lifetimes if we take history as a guidance. Yeah. So also here, I was also thinking like, oh, if we will have a recession, the stock market might crash by 50%. Yeah. So all these kinds of things you get in your head because of all these psychological biases. And I've now learned that that's not the case, and that money is just much better invested. And if you have dividend income and you have saved dividends, you don't even need to worry about the share price. So
Absolutely.
The next question is from Mike, and he's asking what the dividend yield is of your portfolio, and do you actively monitor it?
So I don't necessarily monitor the yield. I monitor my projected annual dividend income, but still, my yield is around 2% for the whole portfolio. When it comes just for the actively managed part, so the individual companies that I own, then the yield's around 4.2%.
Nice one, nice one. So for me, it's 3.8%, and I also neither monitor the yield. That could be a bit higher if I would sell my Facebook and my Alibaba and such, because then I will have dividend income in return for that. Then the next question is from Simon Nurek, and he's asking, which stock or even the stock price of a current holding would you label as the one that got away from you? So you were very close to purchasing it, but you didn't do it for one reason or another. Any stock that comes to your mind?
I actually wrote a blog post about this. Genworth Financial. It's a U.S. Insurance company. When I first looked at it, it was trading at around 1/20th of book value.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's gone up, I think, 4 or 5 times since then.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, I didn't buy it because they're not paying a dividend. So
Yeah.
that was literally the only reason.
Yeah, but it's also maybe good for the listeners to know is you are also to a large extent the value investor, right? Not just the dividend growth investor, but also really looking at the value component of it, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so for me, it was Novo Nordisk during the COVID period. It was like in the low 400s. I had my fair value assessment put it around 400. It was on the pricey end of my value assessment. And I don't know, is it now in the 800 or 900 or something like that? It doubled since then. But for me, at the time, it gave probably a bit of an attractive yield and value risk return. I just didn't just didn't pull the trigger, and that was also one learning of mine. So now when it comes to entry positions, I'm not too greedy for the first position, but the building up I am more greedy.
Yeah.
But not for the first one, because this happened now to me with Novo Nordisk, and I hate it. Then the next question is from Mark Orozzi, also from Facebook, and he's asking, like, what are your thoughts about Intel investing in Germany and also Poland last week, 3 billion, I believe, is it Germany 15 billion? Quite some capital expenditures, or Israel as well, I believe.
Yeah, so this is really, I wouldn't necessarily call this an Intel investment as much as a geopolitical decision, right? Ultimately, the US and the EU want to move chip production from China to a closer to shore location, and so when Intel is just well positioned here, right?
Yeah.
I think if they can get the government subsidies to pay off for these capital expenditures, great. If they can't, I wouldn't be particularly upset if they just cancel the project there.
Yeah. So for me, I'm quite bullish on this as such, in the sense of exactly to what you say. I think there's a strong geopolitical catalyst here for Intel. But the question up in the air is, of course, is like, can they design and can they really get the clients? If they don't get the clients, they have a lot of manufacturing capacity. But I do believe that once those plants are ready, Pat Gelsinger will be again going to Washington and to Brussels, knock on people's doors and say, like, guys, show me the money. And I'm sure there will come some, I would say, legislation in place that forces certain companies to not use TSMC or something like that. They will, of course, not say it directly, but I don't think they will let the investments of Intel and the countries, because they are subsidizing a lot of this, go to waste. Then we have another question from Bas Vervaart from Facebook, and he's asking about your or my thoughts on Siemens at the current price, specifically after the latest guidance of management. Have you had a chance to look into Siemens?
I don't actually follow Siemens, so I don't have anything to add
Okay.
here.
So maybe really quickly then, because they released the earnings of the first half back in May. And what is just astonishing to me is that they were able to grow revenue and orders about 13 to 15%. And for such a behemoth of an industrial company, this is a lot. Of course, these companies are cyclical, but still, you don't see these numbers with the other industrials like 3M, General Electric, and such. So it clearly shows that Siemens has a lot of wind in the sails. What is also good is that the book-to-bill ratio is 1.22, so they're getting more orders at the moment than they currently are billing. So the pipeline is only growing, in other words. And yeah, they are now having a free cash flow of about 2.3 billion for the quarter, which is a lot. If you then look at their outlook, what how is it? What Bas is asking about. So they are targeting an earnings per share of about, let's say, 9.5 to 10 euros, which give this stock currently a PE of 16. Now, when I did my last fair value assessment, I had the stock around 135, 140 euros on a 7 billion cash flow, free cash flow. In the last 2 years, they had about 8.5 billion free cash flow. So maybe I'm on the low end here. So I might need to revise my numbers. Nevertheless, I've been buying Siemens over the years, and I'm happy with my position. I do think that based on, let's say, the back of a napkin calculation, I think, Bas, you're right, that it's probably around fair value here. But I would need to do some deeper research to really establish that.
Yeah,
But
I think
great company, great company.
Yeah, just from the numbers that I'm seeing, it does look to be reasonably fair value. I wouldn't know if I'd have to look deeper to see if there's anything additional there, but for now, it looks
Yeah,
okay.
The thing is with a stock like Siemens that I've experienced by holding it now for many years is that as soon as there's really like we saw in COVID or something like that happening, the share price drops really quickly and faster than others. Because if the world closes down, they are hit hard. If governments don't have the budgets, they are hit hard because they will not buy enough trains, not enough subsidy going to windmills then.
Yeah.
So it is by definition cyclical, and so there might be just better times to buy this stock at a certain moment, mostly under stress. Then there's a question from both Carlos and Mike again, and they're asking like, are there any companies you like from Portugal effectively or from the stock exchange there?
This is a difficult question because I want to say yes, because there are several companies that I feel like, oh, they're almost there, they could actually be something decent, but then I look into it deeply and it's like, oh God, no. Why would you have to do this? So for example, a good example is a pair of companies actually, Simapa and I forget the name of the other one, Navigator. Yeah. So they're intrinsically connected because Simapa owns about 60% of Navigator. And either one of those companies, when you look at the screeners, when you do the research, they look undervalued, right? Yes, they're like in the commodity business. It's not a particularly like moody business, but they are decently big companies. They produce a lot of cash. They have some earnings. They distribute those earnings to shareholders. So like all green flags. But then you look at their ownership structure, and it's a huge mess with like companies that own other companies that are owned by other companies. And when you really look into it, this is a family company that's masquerading as a publicly traded company.
It looks more like a bad episode of The Godfather.
Exactly. So like, I'm sure I could buy it. I would receive a lot of very nice dividends, very juicy. The companies would likely do well, but at the end of the day, these companies are controlled by one family.
Yeah.
And I'm not in that family.
Yeah. Not yet. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your unsalted opinion. Then the next question is from Ivan Mitchell, and he's asking about ticker symbol SMG. And SMG stood for, let me look it up again because it had a difficult name.
Scott's Miracle Grow.
Yes. And the name already, when there's a name Miracle in it, I wonder if they are really serious about investors, but okay. And he's asking, is this a good long-term hold? Is the dividend safe? And is this a good indirect play on the cannabis trend? So if you look at the share price of this company, oh my God, it went into 2021 really hyperbolic. I think it dropped really hard again now to 1/3 of what it was trading for to then. But look, dividend growth looks decent. They have been growing the dividends for, I think, a decade. I think they at one time a $5 dividend in between. That sounds like a special dividend at the time. They have a price to free cash flow of 10, a dividend yield of 4% and a bit. They do have a high debt equity ratio of 1.5 or something like that. But on the other end, they seem to, with the interest coverage, okay, of 6. But please watch out with this one, because if their debt starts to mature and they need to reissue debt here because they cannot pay it out of free cash flow, they will not get the same interest rates, and this interest coverage might drop from 6 really rapidly to under 2, and then you're really in the danger zone. So watch out with that one. They have a really good historical return on invested capital and return on equity, but something happened last year. The revenue dropped by 20%, and that's a big red flag for me. I've not studied this company, therefore, and that's why it also, by the way, negative earnings for the first time in a decade or something like that. So for me, this is a big red flag. And if you're really serious about this, Ivan, about this company, you really need to look into that and figure out why this is and how this is possible. Because a 20% revenue drop, that means something. Either they spun off as a part of the business, but then I wonder why there's a negative net income. Or they just lost a major client or whatever it is, but this looks not good. Maybe you know more than me, Ivan, here, let me know. But for me, this is a big red flag.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important to really look deep into the company and look at it with a clear mind, because especially for these meme stocks or cannabis stocks or whatever you want to call it, like depending on what day it is and what stock it is, you really can't get caught up in the hype. And a lot of people get caught up in the hype, and that's how they buy Nikola at 70 and then watch it drop all the way down to, I think it's at 50 cents now. And so yeah. So I don't know much about the company, but I would be careful.
So next question then is from Lars Lorsheid, and he's asking whether Euronext as a dividend company is worth investigating. They cut the dividend during COVID, but it's growing again in earnings and dividends. So I just looked at it really briefly, Lars. I wouldn't be interested personally, for the reason that although the yield is 3.4%, they just have irregular dividend payments if you take like a decade as a time horizon. Although their balance sheet seems healthy, for me, the irregularity of dividend payments is already something that turns me off on the company. So that's my really quick take on that one, Lars. Then the last question is from RMS. And he wants to bring his dollar exposure down in his portfolio with a dividend ETF. And then he's asking which Europe or EU ETF can you recommend, or do you like the best? So really quickly, I put also a link to an article on my blog in the description of this podcast, which links to 15 UCITS ETFs. But look, I would not do just one. I would take a combination of 3 of those. But be aware, UCITS ETFs, they hardly ever show consistent dividend growth. They are usually a little bit of a different nature, and the article explains that. But I will put 30% into the iShares UK dividend ETF. It has really high dividend at the moment with a 6.24% yield, but also with 0.4% total expense ratio. So your net dividend will be 5.84%. The second one I will put into, and that will be around 40%, I will put in the FTSE Developed Europe UCITS ETF. This one is from Vanguard, and it gives you really exposure to the Roche, the Novo Nordisk, and these kinds of companies here because it's focused on high quality European stocks. It has currently a yield of 3.10% and an expense ratio of 0.1, so an effective dividend income at 3% before, of course, dividend withholding tax. The third one I would take is a bit more like, let's call it like tropical. It's the 30% that I will put into the iShares emerging market dividend, which gives you exposure to Brazil and some of the other countries here, which currently yields 8.12% and a total expense ratio of 0.65. So that gives you kind of a 7.5% net dividend yield. So those would be the three. The Vanguard European dividend ETF, I think, is the highest quality. The other ones are more on high dividend income because with all these ETFs in Europe, you can't really expect consistent dividend growth.
Yeah. I would actually question whether or not you actually need a dividend ETF, right? And what role that would serve in your portfolio. Because unless you have like a specific need for dividends, why not just pick an accumulative ETF? Or why restrict yourself to just Europe or EU ETFs when you can get something that is just the whole world, maybe excluding the US if you're trying to get away from the US dollar? I don't know.
Yeah,
just something.
Fair point. I assume he's looking for dividend income here. I mean, you can also go for the ticker symbol FUSD as an example, but then you get like a 1 point something percent yield. For me, those are not interesting enough here, although they do tend to grow a little bit over time more than the others. Okay, having said that, we're almost to the end of the show, but I really don't want to let you go, Tiago, without a stock that you're currently interested in. I will not call the recommendation because we don't really do recommendation here, but what's the stock that's currently having your attention?
So this is actually something that I'm about to show later this week in the IRL dividend day. And actually, by the time this podcast comes out, the blog post that I've written on it will probably be out already as well. And the company name is Celanese Corp, ticker symbol CE.
Mm-hmm.
It's an American multinational that deals in specialty chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
So they have they make plastics, polymers, acids, vinyl. Their products are used in pretty much every major industry, and they are very highly diversified, from automotives, petrochemicals, chip manufacturers, whatever you want to call it, they probably use it. And yeah, they have recently made a very large acquisition of one of their competitors. Their revenues and earnings are at all-time highs and about to drop down like a rocket because they're a little bit cyclical. But I think that given their history, even if earnings drop to half of what they currently are, they'll still be a fairly decent value. They pay an okay dividend. And so I'm thinking that it's definitely an interesting company to look into it and potentially add it to a dividend-focused portfolio.
Cool. So ticker symbol CE for our listeners. And maybe also good to clarify, all ticker symbols will be in the show notes or in the description of this podcast. I mean, it's a company I never heard of. So I'm actually quite interested. It sounds a little bit like AkzoNobel when I heard you talking from the Netherlands. So is that one of their competitors?
They actually have a list of competitors in their annual report, but I forget if that's one of them.
Okay, might be.
They
might
have
be.
like 20 different competitors.
Yeah,
because-
well, it's not a monopoly, so
Yeah.
I will look it up in the background. But you caught my attention with that one. Hey, but Tiago, thank you so much for joining and being the stand-in for Derek as well. I think you did an awesome job, so thank you for that. And yeah, any last thoughts, last words that you want to share with the community?
No, just keep doing what you're doing, and remember, you can only get somewhere if you know where you want to go. So make a plan, figure out what your objective is, and stick to your plan.
Cool. Well, I think those are wise words to finish off the show with that one. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Tiago. Hope to see you next year somewhere again on the show, and wishing everybody a good week. Bye-bye.
Remember, both of us at Dividend Talk are not certified financial specialists through formal education. We are just two guys sharing our journey for inspiration and entertainment purposes. Hence, this is not investment advice. Although we do our best, we can't promise that the information discussed is always correct, nor appropriate for you or anybody else. We always recommend that you do your own due diligence and be accountable for your own choices. As we always say, you can't borrow conviction from others. Last but not least, by listening to our podcast, you agree to hold us harmless from any ramifications, financial or otherwise, that occur to you as a result of acting on information provided in this podcast.